Last Christmas Eve, my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "This house only has room for one family, and that's ours." She said it quietly, like she was commenting on the weather. My son sat right there and didn't say a word. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a corporate attorney. I've argued cases before federal judges. I've broken opposing counsel in depositions that lasted 3 days. And I sat at my own kitchen table, the table I'd had since my wife was alive, and I didn't say anything either. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was believing them when they said it was temporary. Let me back up. When my wife passed, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, the house stopped making sense. 4 bedrooms, a yard she'd designed herself, a kitchen where every corner had a memory attached to it, the coffee maker she insisted on buying, even though it cost more than our first car, the herb garden she kept by the window, rosemary, thyme, one scraggly basil plant she named Gerald that somehow survived 3 winters. After she was gone, I'd walk through those rooms and feel like I was trespassing in someone else's life. My son came to see me about 2 months after the funeral. He brought his wife, and they sat across from me with the careful, practiced expressions of people who have rehearsed a conversation. He told me I seemed lonely. He told me the house was too big. He told me they had a plan. The plan was this: sell my house, pool the money with theirs, buy something bigger in a better neighborhood where they could start their family. I'd have my own suite on the ground floor. A real suite. Private bath. A sitting room. French doors opening onto a garden. We'd be family. I wouldn't be alone. I could watch my grandchildren grow up. I want you to understand something about grief. It doesn't just make you sad. It makes you stupid. Not permanently, but for a while. It hollows out the part of your brain that asks questions like, what's the catch? And why does this benefit them more than it benefits me? And should I have an attorney look at this? I was a contract attorney for almost 4 decades, and I let them hand me a cocktail napkin arrangement, and I nodded along like a man who had never seen a clause in his life. I sold the house. $1.3 million. My wife and I had paid $112,000 for it in 1987. 36 years of holidays and children's birthdays and a marriage that lasted until the very last possible moment. All of it went into escrow in 6 weeks. I gave them every dollar. They used it as the down payment on a $2 million house in a suburb 40 minutes from where I'd spent my entire adult life. My name was not on the deed. That was the first thing I should have caught. I didn't. I was still hollowed out. The ground floor suite was beautiful, I'll give them that. South-facing windows, a small private patio, a bathroom with a walk-in shower, with a bench, because my son knew my knee wasn't what it used to be. I'd hung 3 photographs of my wife on the wall beside the window. One from our honeymoon in Savannah, one from the year we took the whole family to Yellowstone, one just the 2 of us, maybe 10 years ago, sitting on the back porch of the old house at dusk. She's laughing at something I said. I can't remember what it was anymore. For a few months, it almost worked. I cooked dinner twice a week. My daughter-in-law was polite at the table. My son and I watched football on Sunday afternoons. It wasn't what I'd had, but it wasn't nothing. Then things started to shift. It happened the way bad things usually do, incrementally, so that each individual moment seemed almost reasonable. The Sunday dinners became optional for them. Then the kitchen started to feel like I was borrowing it. Then one morning, I came upstairs for coffee and found my daughter-in-law's mother sitting at the kitchen island with a mug and a magazine, and nobody had mentioned she was visiting or how long she planned to stay. The mother stayed 11 days. Then came the conversation about the suite. My son started it, but I could tell by the way he was sitting, spine straight, jaw set, the posture of a man who has been given a script, that the words weren't really his. "Dad, we've been thinking." With the baby coming, I stopped him. "What baby?" He exchanged a look with his wife. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching. "We're trying," he said. "Actively trying. And the doctor says we need to start preparing the environment now. The stress of not being organized, it affects fertility. I looked at my daughter-in-law. She gave me a small, tight smile. The room upstairs at the end of the hall would be perfect for a nursery, I said. Good light, quiet, right next to your bedroom. We need that room for something else, she said. Not, we prefer this arrangement, or would you mind if we discussed options? Just, we need that room for something else. There's also the middle guest room, I said. Dad. My son's voice had a new quality in it, something I hadn't heard before, or maybe hadn't wanted to hear, something that came from her, not from him. We've thought this through. The ground floor suite is the right space for the nursery. The layout makes sense. Near the kitchen, no stairs. Enough square footage for everything we'd need. He paused. We'd set you up in the bonus room above the garage. I had seen the bonus room above the garage exactly once when the real estate agent showed us the property. It was unfinished. Exposed insulation, plywood subfloor, a single window the size of a paperback novel, and a pull-down attic ladder instead of a proper staircase. For a man with a bad knee. You want me to climb a ladder, I said. Every day. To sleep. We put in a proper staircase, my daughter-in-law said quickly. It would feel like a real space by the time we're done. And my suite? My bathroom? My patio? The room where I hung your mother's photographs? I was looking at my son when I said it. I watched something move across his face. Guilt, I thought. Or maybe just discomfort. He'd always confused the two. It's temporary, she said. Once the baby is sleeping through the night, we can revisit the arrangement. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes not from being screamed at, but from being managed. From being handled. From watching two people across a table use soft voices and reasonable phrasing to take away the one thing you were promised and then tell you it's temporary and expect you to nod. I nodded. I don't know why. My knee hurt. I was tired. Part of me still believed that families found their way through things. That blood meant something. That my son was in there somewhere underneath whatever she had made of him. I said, temporary. I said, all right. I said the words. The bonus room above the garage took 3 weeks to prepare. During those 3 weeks, I slept in my suite for the last time while the sounds of planning moved through the house above me. Her voice, always giving direction. His, shorter, agreeing, when I finally climbed the new stairs. They did install proper stairs. Credit where it's due. I stood in what was now apparently my home and tried to assess it, with the clear eyes of a man who had been evaluating situations professionally for 40 years. 800 square feet, laminate flooring in a color I would call institutional beige. A portable air conditioning unit that sounded like a small helicopter. My photographs were on the wall, which my son had hung himself, which I thought was either a kindness or a calculated gesture, and I was no longer sure I could tell the difference. The first night, I didn't sleep. The AC unit cycled on and off every 20 minutes. I lay there in the dark, and I thought about my wife, and about the house we'd sold, and about the $100,000 she'd told me to keep separate in my own account because you never know. She'd said it like a joke. I hadn't taken it seriously. I thought about whether she'd known something I didn't. She usually did. At 2 a.m, I heard a car door close in the driveway. I went to the small window and looked down. It wasn't my son's car. It was a black SUV I didn't recognize. As I watched, my daughter-in-law came out the front door, dressed at 2 a.m. in a coat and heels, and got in the passenger seat. The car left. I stood at the window for a long time after the taillights disappeared. I started paying attention differently after that. I'm old enough to know the difference between paranoia and pattern recognition. I've spent my career reading people, reading documents, reading the space between what someone says and what they mean. What I saw over the next 3 weeks was a pattern. The black SUV came twice more. Always late. Always when my son was traveling for work. My daughter-in-law's spending, which I'd noticed was significant, accelerated. Packages arrived daily. Not the ordinary kind of household purchases, but boxes with the kind of discreet, expensive packaging that doesn't advertise its contents. I noticed my son came home from his work trips looking not rested but depleted, the way people look when they've been managing something heavy. Then I found the letter. I wasn't looking for it. I'd come downstairs to retrieve a cardigan I'd left in the laundry. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, open, face up, like someone had set it down in a hurry. It was from a title company. It was addressed to both of them, but the letter itself referred to an agreement apparently signed only by my daughter-in-law, granting power to initiate a refinancing process on the property. Without my son's signature. Without, it seemed, his knowledge. I'm a contract attorney. I know what a fraudulent refinancing application looks like. I know what it means when one party to a joint property attempts to leverage that property without the other party's consent. I know what the exposure is, and I know, very precisely, what tools are available when you discover that the arrangement you entered into in good faith has been operating as a trap. I went back upstairs to the bonus room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the portable AC clattering in the corner, and I made a phone call, not to my son, not yet, to Hartwell and Associates, to a colleague I'd sent referrals to for 20 years, a woman named, well, let's just say she's the best real estate and estate litigation attorney in the state, and she owed me more than one favor. I need you to pull the property documents on a house in Millhaven County, I said. And I need you to look at something that was in the original trust arrangement I established when I transferred funds. There was a pause. Ben, you actually had documents drawn up. I'm a lawyer, I said. I was out of my mind with grief, not out of my profession. When I'd transferred the $1.3 million, I had insisted, over my son's mild objections, that it was overly formal for a family situation, on a structured gift agreement. Not a loan, a gift, technically, but with conditions embedded in a codicil that attached to the property title in the form of a recorded lien. The lien was simple. It documented that the funds had originated from the estate of my late wife and myself, that the transfer was conditional on my continued occupancy of the ground floor suite of whatever property was purchased, and that any attempt to refinance, encumber, or transfer the property without written consent from the lien holder, me, would trigger a demand for repayment of the full transferred amount, plus interest, within 90 days. I had forgotten about it. Not completely. I'd had my attorney draw it up. I'd signed it. But in the fog of those first months, I'd filed it away in the part of my brain that dealt with things I'd handled and didn't need to revisit. I should have revisited it. They moved you out of the ground floor suite, my attorney said when I'd explained the situation. Correct. Without your written consent. Correct. A pause. I heard her typing. And there's an attempted refinancing on record that you didn't authorize. Also correct. Another pause. Longer this time. You know what this means. I know what it means, I said. I want to know what you think. She said, I think your daughter-in-law just handed you a loaded weapon and asked you to be too old to notice. I sat with that for a moment. Draft the demand letter, I said, but don't send it yet. There's something I need to understand first. What I needed to understand was my son. I needed to know whether he was complicit or oblivious, whether the man I'd raised had become something I didn't recognize, or whether he was, like me 4 months ago, too hollowed out to see clearly. It mattered, not for legal reasons. It mattered because he was my son, and I was not yet ready to let go of that. I bought a small voice-activated recorder from an electronics store on the edge of town, the kind journalists use. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not ashamed of it. I'd spent 40 years in rooms where things were said that people later wished they could take back. I placed the recorder in the kitchen, inside the ceramic fruit bowl that had been my wife's, in the space behind the fake oranges. No one ever moved those oranges. I told my son I was going to visit an old friend in Asheville for a long weekend. I drove 40 minutes up the highway, checked into a motel, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The recording was 3 hours and 14 minutes. I listened to all of it, sitting in a motel room with a bad mattress and a view of a parking lot, and by the time it was over, I understood everything I needed to understand. My daughter-in-law had a plan. The plan was several months old. It involved the black SUV, a man, as I'd suspected, someone she'd apparently been involved with before the marriage and during it. The plan involved the refinancing, extracting equity from the house, and ultimately involved selling the property and disappearing with what she estimated would be close to $1 million after the mortgage was settled, before my son or I could respond. My son didn't know about the man. He didn't know about the refinancing. What he did know, what I heard him acknowledge in his own voice in my dead wife's kitchen, was that he had agreed to move me out of my suite because his wife had asked him to, without understanding why she wanted the room, without asking, without even considering that his father might have had a legal right to it. She said it would be better for the baby, he told someone on the phone. His brother-in-law, it sounded like. I didn't really think about whether Dad had any claim to it. She wanted it, and I didn't want another fight. He didn't want another fight. 38 years of his life paid for by a man who spent his weekends watching his son play baseball, who drove 3 hours each way to see him graduate from law school, who held his hand in a hospital waiting room when the first pregnancy ended before it had a chance to begin. And my son had handed over my room to keep the peace with the woman who was planning to rob us both. I called my attorney. Send the letter, I said. The demand arrived at the house on a Tuesday. I know because my son called me at 7:14 that morning, so early that the parking lot outside my motel room was still gray with mist. Dad. His voice was... I don't have a good word for it. Compressed. Like something was pressing on him from all sides. Dad, there's a letter here, from an attorney. I know, I said. Silence. Then, did you know about this? About the lien? I set it up, I said. Before we transferred the funds. More silence. Longer. I could hear him breathing. She moved you out of your room, he said. It wasn't a question. He was working something out. Yes. And the refinancing. He stopped. Dad, I didn't know about the refinancing. I swear to you, I didn't sign anything. I know you didn't. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The compression was still there, but under it something else was opening up. Something raw. She's been planning this. I didn't answer. How long? He asked. And his voice cracked in the last word the way it used to when he was 12 years old, and something had surprised him by being worse than he expected. I thought about what to say. I thought about the recording. I thought about what it cost a person to hear their own catastrophic misjudgment played back to them in their father's voice. I decided he needed to hear it, but not yet. Not on the phone, not like this. Come see me, I said. I'm at the Millhaven Motor Lodge on Route 9. Room 11. Bring coffee. He was there in 40 minutes. He sat on the edge of the other bed in my motel room, in the same suit he'd clearly put on in a hurry, and I told him everything. The recording. The man. The timeline as best I'd reconstructed it. I didn't soften it. I'd been softening things for my son's benefit for 40 years, and he'd mistaken it for permission. He didn't cry, not exactly. But his face did something I hadn't seen since his mother died. It went completely still, the way a body of water goes still right before something large moves beneath it. I let them do that to you, he said. It wasn't about the room, not really. He was talking about all of it. I let her, I kept not wanting to make it worse. I know, I said, that's not. He stopped. Started again. That's not enough. No, I said. It's not. We sat in that room for a long time. The parking lot outside filled up with the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday morning. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said, which was probably something direct and a little bit funny and ultimately true, because that was her particular gift. I thought about how she'd told me to keep $100,000 separate. She'd said it like a joke, but she'd also made me write down the account number. The demand letter required repayment of the transferred funds within 90 days, or legal action to enforce the lien, which in practical terms meant the property could not be sold, refinanced, or transferred without my consent. And if my daughter-in-law attempted to proceed with her plan anyway, she'd be attempting to defraud a recorded lien, which was a matter for law enforcement, not just civil court. She didn't attempt to proceed. She left. Not dramatically. Or maybe dramatically. I wasn't there to see it. My son came home from the motel and found half the closet empty, and her car gone. She'd taken the things she valued, which turned out not to include much of what they'd bought together, because those things were tied to the property, and the property was now encumbered. She'd been smarter than I gave her credit for a while. Then, she got impatient. My son called me when he found the empty closet. He sounded like a man standing in a room that used to mean something. "What do I do?" he asked. "Start by making coffee," I said. "Then call a family attorney." "Not me. Someone who handles divorce. You'll want someone who knows what financial dissipation looks like during a marriage, because there are records to pull and grounds to pursue." "And you?" he asked. I looked out the window of the motel room at the parking lot. I'd been in that room for 4 days. The mattress was genuinely terrible. "I'm coming home," I said. I went back to the house. My son helped me carry my things back down from the bonus room above the garage. It took one trip, because I hadn't really settled in. We put my photographs back up in the ground floor suite, the one of her laughing at something I can't remember. He held it while I straightened the hook. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. He'd said it 3 times already and I hadn't responded, because I was still working out whether words were enough. I've been a lawyer long enough to know that an apology is only as good as what follows it. "I know you are," I said. "We didn't resolve everything that day. You don't rebuild what we damaged in an afternoon." But he stayed for dinner, and he did the dishes. And at around 9 o'clock, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and asked me to tell him something about his mother. Not anything in particular. Just something. I told him about Gerald, the basil plant. How she'd named it, how she'd talked to it sometimes when she thought I wasn't around. How, after she'd been diagnosed and we both knew what was coming, she'd repotted it into a bigger container and left detailed care instructions on a note card in the kitchen drawer. I still have the note card. Gerald is still alive, just barely, honestly, but alive. My son laughed at that. The first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. It sounded like something returning. The legal process took several more months. My daughter-in-law retained counsel and challenged the lien. And for a while, things were unpleasant and expensive in the way that legal things usually are. But the document was clean. I'd drafted the structure myself and had it reviewed twice. And in the end, the challenge failed. The property was eventually sold, and my son's initiative once the divorce was finalized, because neither of us wanted to live in a house that had become about something other than a home. He walked away with enough to make a fresh start, and the knowledge that he'd earned it, honestly, which I told him was the only kind of start worth having. I used my portion, together with what my attorney recovered in fees, to buy a smaller place, a ranch house, single story, good light, room for a garden. There's a corner in the kitchen that gets afternoon sun for most of the year. I put her herb garden there. Rosemary, thyme, and Gerald, in his bigger pot, looking improbably alive. My son comes to dinner on Sundays now. He's in a small apartment 20 minutes away, doing his own laundry, cooking his own meals, figuring out who he is without someone else defining it for him. It's not easy. I don't tell him it is, but I watch him working at it. Really working, not the way he used to coast, and I recognize something in it that I haven't seen from him in years. He has his mother's stubbornness. Took him 42 years to show it. But there it is. People have asked me since all of this came out whether I think I was too hard on him. Whether I should have been more forgiving, moved more gently. I've thought about it. I'm still thinking about it. The way you keep returning to a problem that doesn't have a clean answer. Here's what I know. I spent my career making sure people had agreements in writing. Not because I distrusted them, but because a written agreement protects everyone. It tells you what was promised. It tells you what was expected. It gives you something to return to when memory gets cloudy or circumstances get hard. For 40 years, I told my clients, protect yourself from the good times, because that's when the terms are clear. Nobody signs a good contract in a crisis. I got grief stupid. I let sentiment substitute for structure. I should have put my own name on the deed. I should have insisted on more than a lien. I should have known that hollow sympathy and genuine care look almost identical from across a dinner table, and that you have to look harder, longer, and more coldly than love usually allows. My wife knew. She always knew. She kept telling me to be careful in that particular way she had. Light, almost teasing, so it didn't feel like a warning until later, when you realized it was exactly that. I hear it now whenever I sit in the afternoon sun in my kitchen, in the house that is mine and only mine, listening to Gerald photosynthesize in the corner. She was trying to protect me, even then, even at the end. That's the kind of woman she was. That's the kind of love it was, and whatever it cost me to find my way back to something that resembled a life, the money, the months in a garage, the long, ugly process of watching my son wake up. I'd do it again to know that. To know she was right. And that I finally listened. It just took me a little longer than it should have.